Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? Maybe it was subtle at first, a few missed calls, a visit that kept getting postponed, a birthday remembered only by a short text. Or maybe it wasn't subtle at all. Maybe one day you realized you'd been waiting at the window, heart hopeful, only to watch the hours pass in silence. The day came and went, and the knock never came. And then you wondered, not just where they were, but where you had gone. That version of yourself who used to feel important, needed, part of something. It's a quiet ache, one not always spoken out loud. But I know it's there. There's something about growing older that brings with it both wisdom and a strange kind of invisibility. We become wiser, more experienced, more understanding, and yet, somehow, less seen, especially by the very people we once held in our arms, stayed up all night for, and gave everything to. And when family doesn't visit, when the laughter that once filled the house grows quiet, it can begin to feel like our worth has dimmed with the years. But what if I told you that your light hasn't dimmed at all? What if it's simply waiting to shine again, but this time, for you? Let's talk gently about something that many people carry in silence. How to keep your heart full and your spirit joyful even when family isn't near emotionally or physically. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt. Not by cutting people off, but by cultivating habits that gently bring you back to yourself. Because emotional independence isn't about hardening your heart. It's about softening into your own presence and realizing that you are enough, not as someone's parent or spouse or sibling, but as a soul who still matters deeply. Let me tell you a story about Henry. Henry was 72, living alone in a quiet little house with ivy climbing up the fence and old jazz records collecting dust by the window. He used to be surrounded by noise, grandkids running through the kitchen, his son asking him to fix things around the house, his daughter always calling for recipes. But life got busy. The visits slowed, then stopped. And Henry found himself filling the silence with reruns of old shows and crossword puzzles he barely cared to finish. One morning, he looked in the mirror and said aloud, "I miss me." That was the beginning. The first habit Henry formed was deceptively simple. He began greeting himself in the morning. He would actually say, "Good morning, Henry," and smile. It sounds silly, doesn't it? But what he was doing was powerful. He was recognizing himself, acknowledging his own existence. It was the start of a new relationship with the man in the mirror, a quiet reclaiming of self. You see, when you're no longer greeted with warm hugs or enthusiastic voices, it's easy to forget that you are still deserving of joyful attention, even if it comes from within. That's the first habit. Reconnect with yourself each morning. Say your name. Smile. Make a cup of tea and drink it slowly. Not because someone's visiting, but because you are worth the calm. That small act sets the tone for the rest of the day. It reminds you that the day still belongs to you. The second habit is something Lily taught me. She was 67 and had raised 4 children, all of whom had moved across the country. One day, she realized she had become a background character in their lives, helpful when needed, forgotten when not. Instead of growing bitter, she decided to reinvent what it meant to be central in a story. Lily began creating what she called joy rituals. Every Wednesday afternoon, she would dress up, hair done, favorite perfume, a pop of lipstick, and take herself to a new coffee shop or park. No occasion, no one to impress, just her, honoring her own presence in the world. And over time, she started running into familiar faces. Conversations bloomed. A sense of belonging returned not through family, but through community. So that's the second habit. Cultivate joyful rituals that center you, not waiting for a visit to bring you joy, but becoming the reason joy visits you. When you walk out into the world with intention, you're no longer waiting to be remembered. You are choosing to remember yourself. These habits may seem small, saying your name in the morning, dressing up for your own joy, but the emotional shift they create is enormous. Because here's the quiet truth. When we begin to value our own presence, we stop anchoring our self-worth to who shows up for us and start anchoring it to how we show up for ourselves. There was a time, maybe long ago, or maybe just last year, when your value was measured in how much you gave, how available you were, how often you said yes, even when your heart whispered no. But now, This chapter is different. It's not about who you used to be for others. It's about who you're becoming for yourself. And in that journey, there is freedom. You don't have to stop loving your children. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt when they don't call. But you also don't have to hand them the keys to your happiness. They may have once needed you to light their path. But now, it's your turn to walk fully in your own light. And that light begins with simple things. A smile to yourself, a walk under the trees, a soft song you hum while making lunch, the quiet decision to matter to you, even if no one else shows up today. And in those small, consistent acts, something beautiful happens. You stop feeling invisible not because someone finally noticed, but because you finally did. There's something very quiet and very powerful that happens when you begin to see yourself again. Not as someone waiting by the phone, or as someone endlessly giving without return, but as someone whole, someone worthy, exactly as you are. But of course, that shift doesn't happen overnight. It's gentle, often slow. Like the way the morning sun creeps over a windowsill, it takes its time. But it always arrives. One of the things that often holds us back from fully stepping into our joy is a pattern we don't always notice, the habit of people-pleasing. And I say that with love, because it's usually born from a very tender place, a place of wanting to be helpful, wanting to be loved, wanting to make sure the people around us feel safe and cared for. Abigail was someone who lived her entire life making sure others were comfortable. She told me once, "I don't even know what I like to eat anymore. I just cook what everyone else likes." Her kids had grown and moved away, but she was still setting the table for memories, still holding on to the hope that if she stayed useful, she'd stay loved. That's the third habit I want to share with you. Not giving up on love, but learning to give to yourself first. To stop making your own needs the leftovers on life's plate. To stop shrinking so others can feel big. It starts with little things, like asking yourself before every decision, what do I want here? What matters to me? When Abigail finally said no to watching the neighbor's dog for the third time that week, because she wanted to attend a watercolor class. Instead, she felt a pang of guilt. But afterward, as she painted in that sunlit room, surrounded by soft music and strangers turned friends, that guilt softened into something else. It softened into peace. And she realized her time mattered too. If you've spent a lifetime putting others first, this might feel foreign at first, even selfish. But let me assure you, putting yourself on your own list doesn't mean you're abandoning others. It means you're finally including yourself. And in doing so, you model something profound for your children, your friends, and for anyone who has ever forgotten their own worth. Another reason this emotional shift can be difficult is because many of us were raised to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to swallow discomfort, rather than risk upsetting the people we love. And for a while, that might have seemed like the best path. But over time, the cost of silence becomes heavy. Madeline was 70 when she finally told her daughter something she'd been holding in for years, not with anger, not to accuse, but to express her own needs. Her daughter often visited only when she needed help, a ride, alone, babysitting, but never just to be with her. Madeline used to accept it quietly, always saying yes with a forced smile, until one day, she didn't. She sat her daughter down and said, very calmly, "I love you, I'll always love you, but I also need to feel like more than a resource. I want to be seen as a person, not just a convenience." And then she waited. There was silence. Then some tears, and slowly, a new kind of conversation began, one based not on obligation or guilt, but honesty. That's the fourth habit. Speaking your truth with gentleness, not to punish or demand, but to honor your own heart. You can love someone deeply and still let them know when something isn't working for you. In fact, real love needs that kind of truth. Otherwise, it becomes performance, a show we put on to be accepted, rather than a relationship where we can breathe freely. I want to remind you of something here. Boundaries are not walls. They're not meant to keep others out. They're meant to protect the sacred space of your own heart. Think of it like a garden. If you never close the gate, if you let anyone walk through it day or night, eventually the flowers get trampled. Your time, your energy, your peace, these are your flowers, and it's okay to protect them. Lucas, a retired teacher and grandfather of 5, told me that the hardest boundary he ever set was telling his son he wouldn't be able to drop everything for last-minute babysitting anymore. He was kind about it, but firm. I realized, he said, I was rearranging my entire life just to get crumbs of connection, and that didn't feel good anymore. What happened next surprised him. His son didn't get angry. Instead, he started calling more, planning visits, respecting his time. Not because he was forced to, but because he sensed a shift. Lucas was no longer chasing love. He was walking in his worth, and people notice that. They feel it, even if they don't understand it right away. That's the quiet magic of emotional independence. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to guilt anyone into staying. What you need, what you've always needed, is permission to be exactly who you are, fully, unapologetically, and that begins the moment you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. This doesn't mean giving up on your family. It means taking your heart off the auction block, no longer selling yourself piece by piece for temporary attention or approval. Because real connection, it doesn't require you to perform, it just asks you to be present. And sometimes, in creating space for your own presence, you end up attracting the kind of love that sees you clearly again. Let's sit with that for a moment. If you've ever felt like your kindness was being taken for granted, if you've ever said yes while your heart whispered no, if you've ever felt invisible in your own story, please know this. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. There is a deep, steady kind of joy that doesn't come from being surrounded by people, but from being deeply rooted in yourself. And the habits we're talking about, greeting yourself each morning, creating joyful rituals, honoring your needs, and speaking your truth, these aren't grand acts. They're gentle nudges back to the core of who you've always been. They remind you that even if the house is quiet, your life still sings. When we begin to live differently, not louder, not angrier, but more true, something subtle shifts in the air around us. It's almost like people can feel it without words. That presence, that quiet sense of self-assurance, the kind that says, I'm still here, I'm still worthy, and I'm no longer waiting to be reminded. Natalie was someone who used to live in the shadows of her family's schedule. Every birthday, every holiday, every long weekend she waited. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. But her mood, her sense of purpose, her entire world tilted, depending on whether the phone rang. It was exhausting, like being emotionally tethered to a doorbell that rarely rang. One spring, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. She just stopped planning her life around the possibility of someone else's availability. She planted a garden instead. She took up photography, simple things, like capturing the way light fell on her kitchen table or the way the flowers bent in the breeze. And slowly, without even meaning to, she started smiling more. Not because anyone visited, but because she had begun visiting herself again. When her daughter did come by unexpectedly months later, she paused in the doorway and said, "You look peaceful." And Natalie simply replied, "I am." That's the fifth habit. The one that weaves through all the others. Living in a way that honors your own peace. Not waiting to be someone's priority to feel whole. Not shrinking or stretching in hopes they'll stay. Just being fully and letting your joy be something that rises from within. Not something that flickers on and off with someone else's attention. This habit doesn't mean the pain disappears. There are still moments when a quiet dinner table feels too quiet. When a special date passes without a call, those moments ache, but they no longer define everything. Because now, the rest of your life has weight, color, texture, and in that richness, the ache finds a softer place to rest. Owen, a soft-spoken widower in his early 80s, used to say, "I thought joy was something I had to wait for, something my kids or grandkids would bring with them when they walked through the door. But now I know, it was always something I could build with my own hands." He didn't mean it metaphorically. Owen literally started woodworking in his garage again. Not to sell, not for praise, just for the quiet joy of creating. It gave him a rhythm, a reason to get up, a place to put his hands when his heart felt heavy. And as he built birdhouses and picture frames, he also rebuilt something inside himself. When his grandson finally came by one day, it wasn't because Owen had begged, it was because Owen had stopped waiting. He had started living, and that drew people in, not through guilt, but through gravity, because that's what happens when you reclaim your own light. It becomes something others want to sit near again. There's something deeply attractive about a person who is content, grounded, and open, not desperate, not closed off, just complete. People feel safer around that kind of presence, and they often come closer, even if they can't explain why. This is the quiet truth. No one tells us when we get older. Our most magnetic energy doesn't come from chasing love. It comes from embodying it. When you live like someone who is already loved, already valued, already whole, the world responds differently. People treat you with more respect, not because they've changed, but because you have. But even if they don't come closer, even if the calls don't come, you're still okay. That's the beauty of emotional independence. You stop living your life in reaction to other people's absence, and you start shaping it around your own presence. Think about that for a moment. Your presence, your heartbeat, your wisdom, your way of noticing the little things. That's not just background noise. That's the main melody of your life. And when you finally begin to honor it again, everything else either starts to harmonize with it or fades into the distance where it belongs. This isn't about giving up on connection. It's about building a life so full, so rich in your own values and rhythm. That connection becomes an enhancement, not a lifeline. Noah used to write little poems on scraps of paper and leave them in books at the local library. He never signed them, just simple lines like, "Even in silence, I bloom. Even when forgotten, I sing." It was his way of reminding himself and anyone who stumbled across his words that being seen isn't always about being applauded. Sometimes, being seen means you see yourself clearly for the first time in years. And here's the final truth I want to leave you with today. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. That light may have dimmed for a while, hidden behind years of caregiving, of waiting, of hoping someone else would show up and flip the switch. But the switch was always in your hands, and you still have time. So much time to turn it back on. So greet yourself every morning. Dress up for your own joy. Say no when your heart says no. Speak your truth softly, but clearly. Protect your peace like a sacred garden, and live not in response to absence, but in celebration of presence. Yours, because you, just as you are right now, are more than enough. If you're still here with me now, still listening, still feeling, still breathing into the quiet of this conversation, I just want to say, thank you. Thank you for the courage it takes to sit with these feelings. Thank you for opening your heart to words that may have touched something tender in you. Because none of this is easy. It's not easy to speak about being forgotten, to admit that sometimes the silence from those we love most cuts deeper than we let on. And yet, here you are, not running from the truth, but walking through it with grace, with strength, and with a quiet kind of wisdom that comes only with time. I don't know your story in full. I don't know the names you've whispered in prayer, or the nights you've sat by the phone, willing it to ring. But I do know this: you are not alone in this experience. And more importantly, you are not broken. You are evolving. You are returning to yourself. And there is something so powerful, so beautiful about that. Sometimes, we believe that emotional independence means we no longer care, that we've shut ourselves off from love. But the truth is, it's just the opposite. It's learning to care in a way that doesn't consume us, to love others without abandoning ourselves. And if no one has told you this lately, let me say it now. You don't need anyone else's permission to be joyful. You don't need your child's approval, or a spouse's attention, or a friend's validation to feel complete. You only need to remember who you are when no one is looking, and that person you is extraordinary. You've survived heartaches and disappointments. You've rebuilt your spirit. Time and time again. You've shown up with grace when others didn't, and you're still here, still growing, still capable of deep joy, even in the quiet. If anything in this message touched you, if something inside you softened or stirred, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Not for me, but for you, because your story matters, and chances are, someone else reading those comments will see themselves in your words. They'll feel a little less invisible, a little more understood. So if you're willing, I'd love to hear, has your relationship with your adult children changed over time? What has helped you stay strong, or find peace, or rediscover yourself? What small act, what ritual or decision or truth brought you back to joy when the silence felt too loud? Write it down, speak it out. This is your space. And if this video helped you feel seen, if it felt like a warm hand on your shoulder in a moment of stillness, I'd be honored if you chose to stay connected. Click subscribe, not just because that's what people say at the end of videos, but because I genuinely want to keep walking this journey with you. You deserve a space where your voice matters, where your presence is honored, where your growth is celebrated quietly, gently, beautifully, and I want this channel to be that space for you. So here's my final invitation. Live, fully, for yourself. Laugh out loud, even if no one's around to hear it. Eat the good food off the nice dishes, even if no one's visiting. Wear the colors you love. Go where your soul feels most alive. Say yes to yourself, because you've spent years being there for everyone else. Now, it's time to be there for you. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are not unloved. You are exactly where you're meant to be. And this is the beginning of something new. Thank you for being here, for listening, for remembering your own light. I see you, I honor you, and I'll be right here whenever you need a soft voice to remind you of your strength. Take care of yourself. The journey is still yours to write. Until next time.